Good evening. I'm Helen Wallace, and welcome to the Dalí Poetry Series. We're so happy that you all could join us this evening for our ongoing series at the Dalí Museum. We have two wonderful poets with us this evening. We have Gloria Muñoz and also Yolanda Franklin, and we're really delighted to have both of them. Typically, Dr. Hank Hein welcomes all of you. He is hopefully on a fantastic vacation out west, and he's not able to be here with us right now, but I'm sure he'll be watching later to listen to these wonderful poems by these poets. So I will do as Hank always asks me to do and read one of my own poems, and then I'm going to have the pleasure of introducing first Yolanda Franklin and then Gloria, and at the end we'll have our Q&A. So again, thank you for being here. This is a short poem I thought I would read because Father's Day is coming up. And it's a poem I wrote for my father a while ago. And it's a sonnet, a loose sonnet. So it's called Trying on My Father's Jacket. I'd look for them across the backs of chairs or hanging from a doorknob to his room, his jacket well woven with smells. Slipping bare arms in his sleeves, the lining cool on my skin, I'd will myself to square myself like him, pretending I could shoulder all that weight of what he knew and thought we never knew. I too tried to soft step in his shoes, black wingtips worn heavy in flight. But at night, when the house grew quiet, my family asleep in their beds, I remember something he said that sounded like love, and practice knotting his ties, that firm, firm tug. Okay, let's start off with Yolanda. Dr. Yolanda Franklin. Yolanda's debut poetry collection, Blood Vinyls, was published by Anhinga Press, and it's a book that Roxane Gay insists is a must read. A three-time Fulbright Scholar Award finalist in 2019, 18, and 17. Wow. Franklin is also a Cave Canem and Catalu Fellow. Her poems appear or are set to appear in Sugar House Review, Southern Humanities Review, and the Langston Hughes Review. Her poetry also appears in the recent anthology, It Was Written, Poetry Inspired by Hip Hop. Also, Franklin is a two-time recipient of the J.M. Shaw Academy of American Poets Award. She's a proud third-generation Floridian born in Tallahassee, and she received a McKnight Dissertation Fellowship and a Kingsley Writing Award at Florida State University. Currently, she's a visiting professor at Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University, FAMU, where she teaches writing across the curriculum and certified courses, and has been nominated for a Teaching Innovation Award. So welcome to you, Yolanda. We're so very happy to have you here.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. I'm going to start today by reading just a few poems from my debut collection, Blood Vinyls. And I had a really awesome conversation with this invitation about some of the forms. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how this collection gives us some insight into what it means to be a woman who is Black, raised in the South. And that's what Blood Vinyls is going to give us a little insight to this morning, or this afternoon. Florida Coven. Not sure I'm strong enough to cast this spell, but Marie Laveau entrust her to wear the crown of power, seance gumbo, etouffee in a blanket of snakeskins. To Zora, a Florida girl too, drenched in light, baptized by Gulf tides, a conjurer who can make a man come home, and recipe gris-gris to rule the man you love. So no surprise, there are no real borders in the play Fences, yet it usurps female rooms from Tallahassee, my birthplace. The lineage of Florida women grow chicory roots, So no surprise, Angela Bassett's cast as Marie Laveau reconjures the ancestral narrative of our American horror story. So then I am a conduit mulatto, one of the first skeleton keys created by a Bayesian blacksmith with Cherokee brows, a Florida gal from a coven, women grown right up out the ground with hips as wide as the Okeechobee. So no surprise, every man I've loved falls entranced, still ponders what it means to miss Tallahassee. I'm going to continue with some love or unlove. A love bazaar. The form is a left-handed golden shovel guzzle after Sonia Sanchez. Her poem is in this poem, shifted to the left, her poem number 3. I gather up each sound you left behind and stretch them on our bed each night, and I breathe you and become high. Since this trouble man's slow dig in my sugar ditch, I concocted a roux. I made a seafood gumbo from scratch for him with a hex concocted roux. I gather up an absolute tolerance of onion, garlic, thyme, and each sound I add filet, paprika, butter, and flour to clot the roux you left behind. Tomatoes simmer into a vermilion stew. I steep and stretch them, a nylon sachet chock full of Creole metacarpal runes on our bed. Cast all my grandma's double L's, Stella and Isabella, each night. And some hairs he left in the tub and spit sigils to seal the roof. I breathe you with a little salt and a lime. I later bury, bloom down, and become high in soil I transport from St. Helena. You grew if you only knew I walk with ghosts. If he only knew I fed him what I would not swallow. The savory gush in his roux was his own jism, because he's a two-timing, no-diming man, and we can't make it, sugar. You ain't playing by the rules. Sampling in music is very similar to the way that we as poets have a conversation about allusions and nods, if you will. This poem is sampling in Miracle of the Black Female Poets after Phyllis Wheatley, Lucille Clifton, and June Jordan. Won't you please come and celebrate with me what she shapes into a kind of life without a model, both non-white and woman, a sable Venus whose voyage blesses boats that brought her here, and thank whatever gods may be for her unconquerable soul. Oh, come and do marvel at how could she sing and know of a lyrical life. How did she know and see to be except herself? Come celebrate with me that I am. Perhaps you will, because each day something has tried to kill me and failed. Right. Truth be told. 1. Mother, I'm waiting for you to die, so I can tell the story about how on the night my husband tried to kill me, I called to tell you this would happen. My husband, the gun, the rape, the gun, the dream I had the night before, under the ceiling fan, a metronome of doom, like the single sound of a turnstile playing. What's love got to do with it? On repeat, I repeat, help me make it through the night. And you ignored my premonition while we were held hostage in that house on a 4-way stop. 2. All I could remember Remember where the Sundays you and Daddy played Tina like the secular prey, let's stay together. But my husband, and your grandkids and I drove by that house today on the corner of that four-way stop. On the corner of that four-way stop, I left that corner of the four-way stop. And now I know you had to know how it takes a fool to learn how love don't love. Now I am a deck full of queens, centuries who steal claw better be good to me. And no, I know you still believe that I deserve this soundtrack I live, but didn't I? Didn't I make you the most beautiful consequences of love? Right. I'm going to do one more poem from Blood Finals. Black writer, after Tony Hoagland's white writer. Historically, this donkey gospel's been a partition created since constitutions. It's been perceived that our persona eats multiple servings of well-seasoned turnip greens, and that we receive welfare checks at the first of every month. Nevertheless, we like being identified as Black, as writers. Has this made it more difficult for us to publish? Rhetorically, so. But we can't get tired until we publish in white-only magazines. When I visit the shanty shelves of the African American literature section of the bookstore, how do I feel? I know that more of us write about more than just being that. Political scandals, intrepid divorces, dying parents. I know Black readers too need to see their lives reflected on the page. Read memory and vinyl, the fear of vanishing. The job of the artist is not to leave you where she found you. This art requires gentrification. Subsequently, you will start to feel like the RITE of Blinkett's cliches are all you'll ever RIGHT in this world. And gradually, throughout the picketing for contentions, coloring who you are, you deflect it. It adumbrates you to write wider, I mean RIGHTER and RIGHTER. Right. I would like to read some new poems from one of the two collections I'm working on that is currently titled Roux, ROUX. Matrilineal sonnet for my omitted origins and justifiable future. The Black griot woman would love to say where her bloodline began, name Zora or in reverence Marie Laveau, and articulate it began with magical cannons, conjurers and queens, griot culinarians and clairvoyants who enchant storms, undimmed weeblettes and maroon ports. This act is evidence of how writing recovers. My instincts say Tituba is Bayesian, not Amerindian, calls Indian town home, keen and merino skinned. She's always known her power extraordinary. Our mother Isis invented the art of it, magic. Her stage resolve became a benevolent choreography when she set in search of Osiris's 14 body parts pitched all over Egypt, found them under a tamarisk tree. What do you call a queen who does not recognize her own matrilineal majesty? She conjures his bones, performs necromancy before the perils of practice. She meant, I am that which was and is and will ever be, and no mortal has yet lifted the veil which covers me. In this series, I'm going to read a couple more poems. And the thing to know is that these poems are centos, where all of the lines are from Neil Gaiman's novel, which has been made into a TV series, American Gods. They are also persona poems where the characters are Shadow Moon, the main character in the novel, and his wife, dead wife. In the Bone Orchard. Looking at himself in prison blues, Shadow thought of what he'd do when he got out. He would not take the freeways because he didn't know whose side they were on. So he'd stick to the back roads with spooks, members of the opposition, and black hats. Really dangerous people believe they are doing whatever they are doing solely and only because it is, without question, the right thing. Grifts are timeless. They trade on cupidity. One can always cheat an honest woman, but it takes more work, reverentially, like a man who has been permitted into a holy sanctum to examine the bones of a prophet, opens the mouth wide, then remembers himself. There was only one guy in the whole Bible Jesus ever personally promised a place in paradise. He was a convicted thief being executed next to him. Shadow's time in the house of the dead was beginning to feel like something that happened to somebody else a long time ago. That was when he realized he was no longer in prison. Some grifts last forever when you're just a shadow of the past. He was just another bastard trying to feed on the chaos he created, like the kinds of behavior in a specialized environment like prison. It can fail to work when used on the outside. He was doodling in the spilled salt, making squat, blocky room-like shapes. He tossed his silver dollar into the air, remembering the moon and the woman who gave it to him. Comparative Religion. Before this is all over, they'll talk about the odd, but they won't talk about the impossible gods and goddesses who have passed out of memory, buffeted by the black wings of a crowd of crows. It scares me. People who have the glazed, beaten look you only see in airports and prisons. They become unmourned like flypaper. Somewhere in a Motel America, along a corridor where the forgotten wait like the only photograph at the end of a room named the South is a world where opiates have become the religion of the masters. Religions are, by definition, metaphors. If hell is other people, then purgatory is airports. A slow procession of fat black wild turkeys walk like a line of mourners, and shadows walk on gallows ground with a hempen rope around their necks. The living become refugees in the hold of a ship, unbecome people who dream in a land full of stomachs. The important thing to understand about American history is that it is fictional. Keep the glass of Jack Daniels while Bob Dylan sings about hard rain. A storm is coming. Like an oyster dealing with a painful particle of grit, we have to believe with our senses, believe everything, even. Perhaps against all evidence. Ideas are more difficult to kill than people, but in the end, they can be. And I'm going to read the last poem, one for that I'm going to share with you in this series. There so far are 7 of them, and I'm still playing with them to merge the centos from Neil Gaiman's American Gods into a crown of like sonnets. So we're working on it. Just take the moon. There was a storm. This time it picked me up, spun and tumbled me away as I arched up, pushing into her as deeply as I could imagine. And the sky at midday became as dark as night, rent with forks of white flame, and the thunder crashes so loud I deafened. This time I played recklessly, snatched opportunities, moved without thinking, without a pause to consider, like a fly on a strip of browning paper inside a violin. Nothing to go back for. I knew it was a lie, but I do wish I could have kept more of what passed through my hands since I got out of prison. I was given so many things and lost them again, but people believe it's what people do. They believe and will not take responsibility for their beliefs. They conjure things and do not trust the conjurations. Thinking of her opened a window in my mind. I could somehow see her. We are in a jeweler's emporium. I'm in a world with its own sense of logic, its own rules. Like when you're in a dream and know there are rules you must break, but you don't know what they are or what they mean. The real storm had truly begun. The true storm now was here. And then I looked her full in her face, and her heart leapt and sank as eyes, the dangerous sepia of a summer sky, before a storm gazed back into hers, before she told me, just take the moon. And I am going to read just two more poems. The poem I'm reading next, I'm not sure where it's fitting in the series, and the one that I'm reading last is definitely, in my mind, has a home already. So, because my name means violet. I fought a 10-year-old boy who called me a bitch at J. Gaither Park because I told him no, because I warned him not to. I sat on his chest, blew out all of his birthday candles with each fist to his face. Now, somewhere in Tallahassee, a 40-year-old man is trying to forget he got his ass kicked by a girl at his own birthday party. Please be patient with me. I'm putting my finger on the problem. Once I tackled a boy to the ground in Mrs. McKinney's yard. The 70-year-old woman who babysat us after Pineview Elementary let out. I hope you still like me when I say I stuck my tongue down his throat just to say I French kissed someone, anyone. Please be patient with me. I'm putting my finger on the problem. At 19, I put a knife to Junebug's neck, my ex-husband's 300-pound narcoleptic cousin who slept on our couch until his mouth fired. Bitches don't fix a man his plate no more. The problem seems pleased when it thinks its patient is me. The next year, I fought a .22 caliber rifle and shoved a shell in its chamber after my 17-year-old brother-in-law hurled bitch at me over dirty dishes, butt and barrel to his back. I warned him. My daddy always called me shotgun shotty. I keep cocking and recocking. I keep putting my finger on the problem. I fought my ex-husband extra rounds, no gloves, no corners, bare-knuckled, before he raped me. I convinced him to use a condom and kept his semen for evidence. Before he ripped the rotary phone out of the wall, then he brandished a .32 to protect himself. I watched a duel of doves patronize a power line when they only gave him 30 days in county and 2 years probation. The problem keeps putting its finger on me. My first year as a teacher, I fought a phys ed track and field football coach, a coworker who parked his F-150 perpendicular to my Civic. He swore the 7-year itch made him do it. The problem is pleased when it thinks its patient is me. A few years later, I pulled a knife on a boyfriend who refused to pay rent and who refused to move out after he unscrewed each bathroom light bulb at 5 a.m. I learned to dress for work in the dark. Damn, I think the problem keeps putting its finger on me. At 40, I fight the ex-Navy SEAL truck driver who sleeps in combat with me, elbows the back of my head while I sleep. Brain mapping results say a litany of concussions caused strokes to bouquet like red sugar skulls in my circle of Willis. I keep cocking and recocking. The problem keeps putting its finger on me. Right. Last poem. This poem is from a series of poems I am working on for a collection that is currently titled after, it's an allusion to Frank O'Hara's To the Film Industry in Crisis. Toni Morrison speaks posthumously on the Oprah Winfrey Show after an audience views When They See Us. They always say it has nothing to do with race. That's the complicated thing about lies. We become what we believe. It's the marginalia constructed by the moral habits of whiteness. It's just as much the mean machinations of men as the trick itself. But the real trick is making you believe whiteness is a master magician. Race is the greatest invention since womankind, a tale forged by those who need to subscribe to their myopic pathosis like a confederacy of dunces full of snare and malediction, signifying this disease. Hear me, the disease is not racism. It is the greed for sweetness and power. The New World epidemic of this carcinoma hit in 1619. Here, it's 1989, and the Garden of Eden is Central Park. Say their names. Steve Lopez, Antron McCray, Kevin Richardson, Yusef Salaam, Raymond Santana, and Corey Wise. I read their faces. They are the sepia edges of Shakespeare's sonnets. Tell me these three things. Who is Eve? Who is the snake? And who is God this time? Never underestimate the ferocity of the racial imaginary. We must fight to douse the flames of xenophobia. The spiteful house of history lies in the corner of my apartment in heaven. I ask you, what covenant haunts each body? How long will history sever us to subpoena prosthetic limbs? Thank you.
Wow. That was terrific, Yolanda. Thank you so much. So many powerful poems. And you know, you're reading at a perfect time for us because the museum has a great exhibit coming up, Lee Miller, and she's writing, her work will show all kinds of women breaking boundaries. And
awesome.
Yeah, and so your subject matter in many of your poems couldn't be more timely for our upcoming exhibit. So thank you for those words. I'm also really happy to hear you're working on not one, but two more manuscripts. Yes. So that's really terrific too. So
thank you.
I look forward to chatting more about your work during the Q&A.
Yes,
so,
me too.
This would be a good time also for me to do a shout out to the city of St. Petersburg. Thank you to the city for supporting our program here at the Dalí Museum. We couldn't do it without your support. And also a shout out to Tombolo Books, where the books by these two terrific poets can be found. Alsace Valentine at Tombolo stands ready to order the books for you. And I hope that you'll all try to tune in and get Alsace to order both Yolanda's book and also Gloria Muñoz's book. And now I have the pleasure to introduce Gloria. Fitting to have another strong woman follow Yolanda. Gloria Muñoz is a Colombian American writer. She's a literary translator and an advocate for multilingual literacy. Her poetry book, Dawn's Early, Danzirly, was awarded the Academy of American Poets 2019 Ambroggio Prize, which is really terrific. Congratulations again to you, Gloria, for that. Other honors include Lumina's Multilingual Nonfiction Writing Award, a Las Musas Mentorship for Latinx and non-binary authors, and a New York State Summer Writers Institute Fellowship. She's also the author of Your Biome Has Found You, published by Finishing Line Press in 2017. She's a proponent of cross-disciplinary collaboration and has worked alongside botanists, musicians, dancers, historians, visual artists, conservationists, and neuroscientists. Her husband is a fabulous musician as well. She is co-founder of the film organization, Pitch Her Productions, and she's one of half of the songwriting team, Moonlit Música. She teaches creative writing at Eckerd College, where I also taught for many years, and it's a real pleasure to have Gloria with us this evening. And Gloria, I know you're also the faculty advisor for the literary magazine there at Eckerd, and that was a true love of mine in my teaching years there. It's so nice to have that in your capable hands. So welcome to the Dalí Poetry Series.
Thank you so much, Helen, and thank you to the Dalí Museum. Thank you for organizing this wonderful afternoon and evening event. Yolanda, I could hear you read all day. Really fantastic to hear your words. I'm excited to check out more of your work as well. I'm going to read a few poems from Danzirly/Danzirly. It's a bilingual collection, which was published during the pandemic, strangely enough. And yeah, it's been really exciting to have this book in the world. This first poem is called Signals, and it was started in the parking lot of a Walgreens. As many poems, I tell my students all the time, so much writing happens off of the page for me. It happens when I'm doing and driving and walking and, multitasking in the world. When I'm living, poetry happens. And I think that writing happens that way in this poem. And a lot of these poems sort of started in these small moments. Signals. Every mother stitches her children out of superstitions. We decide this as we talk about pregnancy under Walgreens's incandescence. That W, more balloon animal than letter, swoops up, embraces itself, and presents its fullness. A totem, stone fertility goddess, headless and full-bodied. These signals catch me more frequently these days. The curve of a grapefruit, the rev of an engine, peonies, aquarium's seahorse, a quarter's ridge, a quarter slot, my neighbor's wind chimes, blue jay, a swollen tea bag, morning shower steam, malachite mound on my nightstand, your guttural snoring, anything in bloom. I am collecting them, listening, waiting for a voice to reach through time to say, ready. I grew up with a mother who sought signals from everything. This Thanksgiving, again, my childlessness is on the table, wedged between the canned beets and empanadas. My molars crush the butter and salt from Brussels sprouts. I add this popping of leafy heads to my list. I've known the names of my unborn children for years, yet saying them aloud feels elegiac. When I think of having a child, I'm confronted by the latest National Geographic centerfold of ice floes detached from an iceberg. Lost in the continuously dissolving world I keep collecting. The shape of tea leaves, rain clouds, crease lines my hand makes when it's balled into a fist, meaning maybe my body is only meant to carry my ocean. I loved hearing you talk about form, Yolanda. I love form. I love experimenting with form and or learning it really well and then sort of breaking free from it and integrating it in different ways. And this book does that throughout. This poem is a sestina, this next poem. Sestinas are composed of 6-line stanzas, and the ends of the stanzas sort of crochet themselves into the poem in various orders throughout. For those of you who want to learn more about form out there, I highly recommend reading some good sestinas. Oh my gosh, Terrence Hayes's. I think it's not his latest. I think it's like his 2 books ago collection. Notes for My Future Assassin, I believe is the name, is a book of American sestinas. I highly recommend you check that out. This is called Mother Machine. Foot pedal tilting below the skirt, their eyes on the needle, the metal, the thread, the cloth, sliding through jabs of fish spine cuts through inches of air, then little one rises and whirls above unwinding spool. Barefoot, she dances round Mother Machine. A bundle of bees tinkers inside the machine's engine. They are silver and ball-tied and buzzing through the shedding spool, budding cloth to cloth, with a prick and rise and a prick and rise. Their stingers strike tiny fires that cut into her purple lungs. With each new cut the mother makes, the daughter is more machine, less girl. Breathless, pulseless, she rises. Or is she fuller of breath when her eyes of mirror and candlewick witness the cloth's communion to thread and the spool, how it leaks, how its song pools into the room where the mother cuts through her nocturnal tears by running the cloth of paisley and peacock through the machinery of her jaw with her somnambular wide-eyed daughter who hums like a bee. She rises. Above the house, she rises, higher, higher, unspooling into the noctilescent clouds. Starlit, she eyes the tiny house and listens for the gliding cuts. Exhale, exhale. She fears the machine that anchors her kite of cloth and bone to her mother, who cut her of a cloth too similar to hers. How can the daughter rise through the droning bleat of the machine that drains the bleeding spool drop by drop without ever cutting her away? How can she get away from the eyes, from her mother's hypnotic eyes, or from the piles of cloth that cloud the room as she tries to cut away? The needle rises and sinks. The mother spools her into the buzzing machine. This book deals with a lot of intergenerational and cultural, like inherited trauma and history that sort of reincarnates itself in people's lives. And this next poem is called The Romantics, or Los Románticos in Spanish. And it is, it was inspired by someone who was recently in charge and who was throwing around a lot of very hateful rhetoric. Someone who was in charge of our country, and he was throwing around a lot of hateful rhetoric, especially pertaining to immigrants and people from other places. And I thought about joy, unapologetic, unabashed teenage joy, as a form of resistance when writing this. The Romantics. We are high and eating everything. A Costco bag of Chex Mix, a jar of olives. There's a mountain of foil between us in bed from mouthfuls of kisses. We three, asleep on our trash, brimming like subway rats after a baseball game. We are high and eating the tangerine sunrise, consuming our paranoid shoulders as we bury each other again in the sand. We are high and eating amp feedback, sweat, the band's emo harmonies. Nicotine sticks to our hairs, the syrupy bass pours through us. We're a uniform stack of buttermilk pancakes. We are high and eating our fingernails in front of our parents at mass, school plays, holidays, and graduations. They were all born in other countries. We're supposed to be better than this. We sneak into the kitchen window, we prop open with a silent sponge. Each silver soap bubble hushes, see, as we slide over the sink and into a slumbering house. We are high and eating Milk Duds at another midnight screening of The Matrix. Neo is dope, but idiotic. We bend like three melting spoons around each other, pretend we are dreaming. We are high and eating everything with our legs hanging off the jetty. Bioluminescence climbs our calves as smoke inhales us. A glow. We're into the romantics and decide we won't make it past 25. We promise to marry each other if we're too afraid of everyone else. Our heads rest on the dock. Night blooms over us. Hieroglyphic. The ancient symbol for embracing found on the walls of Egyptian caves resembles a nestling of lines. One more crooked than the other, one more shapeless. To solve our modern day disconnectedness, the government will distribute coats that fill with air to simulate a hug to every lonely person in the country. This next poem is a glossa or a glosse, depending on how you pronounce it and where you are in the world. It's an old Spanish form that takes 4 lines and from a poem or from a song and weaves them into the poem. So each last line of each stanza comes from a stanza from Dana Levin's Banana Palace. I think about you a lot, future person. How you will need all the books that were ever read when the screens and wires go dumb. Despite the constant urge to stick all branches in my mouth, to keep a humming terranium inside me, to bend close and dig harder, I can't help but sense the rotting. I think about you a lot, future person. What happens when the rooting powder doesn't work its magic? When everything is bonsai or encased in glass? You'll confuse ancient roots with tripping wire. What a minefield we'll have left. Oh, how you will need. Will also leave you a clusterfuck of concrete and other impenetrable matter, things built with immortality in mind, sundials, bridges, monuments, tombstones. Don't mind the rubble of the present inked on your forearm. Can't remember where you got it, but it stuck. You'll spend most of your life trying to remember, searching in all the books that were ever read. You'll hear about us, of the age of information and the age of experience when we try to hold on to every moment through our phone cameras. I don't know how you'll feel connected when the screens and wires go down. My family is Colombian, and there's a lot of plastic surgery in Colombia. There's a lot of plastic surgery all over the world. And if you do a lot of research about plastic surgery, as I randomly have, you'll discover all these corrective surgeries that are done to help people culturally assimilate, to help them look like a composite of a cultural group. And this poem is called Assimilation, and it's a persona poem. I imagine the skin on the ridge of your nose would be the easiest to slice. But the incision must be made on the inner rim of the nostril to hide any sign of alteration. Then the skin is scythed from fibrous gristle and peeled off like a damp glove. If your nose is too hunched, its crest can be sanded to a delicate slope. If your nose is too flat, a mountain range can be grafted and cinched at the tip. I'll draw the line first in the fold of the lid to extract the blinking flesh. Lift, pull, sew, and while we're here, we might as well slit the edge seams further. Your wider eyes will be waiting, lifted and bruised. Soon, shiny, translucent rinds will expose enviable lychees ripening in the sockets. If your face is too full, open your mouth fish wide, and I'll carve your contour as my scalpel curves around your dreaming of ancestors. My tweezers will pull the excess fat and lineage from your cheeks and chin. I'll snip the muscle below your toddler's tongue to help silken his consonants and vowels, to allow him to lick fully the syntax, to savor the language of success, to flex and flare his tongue, to say what and who and where and ready. I have a series of poems in here that imagine women in media and in pop culture and in history as Latinas. And this was inspired by seeing Hillary run for president, seeing a woman run for president, which was incredible. And I hope we see much, much, much more of it. We're already seeing more of it. And she was dragged through everything because of her personality, because of whatever, various reasons. And I kept thinking, wow, this is a white woman with a political background, really, with a lot of money, a lot of funding, set up for this position, set up for this stage and this title. And what would happen if she was from somewhere else? What would happen what would people do to her if she was somebody else, is the question I kept sitting with. And so I applied that to a few different women in pop culture and in history. This is Latina Hillary. Latina Hillary wants to shout, "Sí se puede," from the podium, but she's too afraid her ratings will plunge. So she purses her lips between sentences and posts only photos of maple trees, though inside she's all palmas and papayas. She wears navy and white. She reins in her accent and undoes the echo in her R's. She eats granola and yogurt behind sunglasses, gets blonder highlights because polls say her hair's too ratty. A recent focus group called it witchy. She obliges for the ratings, though the bleach makes her hair fall out, and now she has to wear a wig. The media calls it her helmet. She just isn't warm enough, like Latinas should be, someone tweets from Utah. She develops a twitch and has to go into tanning beds to scream beneath a canopy of 220-watt bulbs. She persists in her day-glow skin and white suits and pleads to La Virgen de Guadalupe each night on her Bible Belt tour. Billboards display her as a bombastic dragoness. She has too much bite, a man tweets from Virginia. Too much fire. She ices up with Botox and presses sapphires into her brown eyes. They flash open backstage before the big debate. White light bounces off her white suit and she strides through the fog and blaring to the podium. Her shadow, long and lean, is extraterrestrial. And I have a few more here. I'm going to switch things up a little bit. It's my first year. This past year has been an experience, especially, working through the pandemic, teaching. And it's my first year having students who have lost loved ones and friends to school shootings. And I'm not sure how students and how young people are fitting all of this in their lives, this and the pandemic and everything else. But this poem, it's like a very American problem, the school shootings thing. I mean, I think it happens everywhere, but we particularly have high numbers. And this poem is inspired by a conversation with my niece in which we talked about a drill. The bear. The 6-year-old tells me about the drill at school, how the carpet imprinted bumps in palms and knees and made them itchy. How it smelled like pee and cereal under the desk. How she started singing but was quickly silenced by, "No, there's no singing when the bear comes." If would have been a better word choice. The bear has teeth and claws. The bear is out for dinner. If the bear comes. Many of these children have never seen a bear, but they know they could meet one at any minute. And they know to become quieter, smaller. Llorona. All the public places I've cried. Airports, beaches, parking lots, so many, waiting rooms, parks, train platforms, benches. Whose loss is shed? The bluish distillate in Rilke's saucerless cup was watered down with tears to be more bearable. In this morning's coffee, tears dissolve like comets into darkness. If I need a good cry, I watch that astronaut singing Major Tom playing his guitar. Astronaut tears are jello. Even this physics makes my heart confetti. You're too emotional, you said, as my eyes irrigated the flower beds. In India, Colombia, Chile, Japan, and the Philippines, you can still hire a professional mourner. Crying in public ought to be easier. Designated trees or hilltops might help. Or an hour of tears where we can howl in unison and then return to our diluteness, dailiness. Crying is inevitable when headlines read like requiems. When Xiocotl prophesied the conquest of Mexico, all she could do was cry. And I'm going to just read two more here. I'm going to end with a sonnet cycle and then with the title poem of the book here. So this sonnet cycle is called Dove Cycle. I left the room when I heard your last breath. Hereafter, must I think of you as skin left in the room? Mi viejo, dark and thin. On this evening, I remember your death. The feet in the procession dragged beneath your bones and combed hair, shrunken woman, pray to not be left behind like her. Others say you got just what you deserved. The threat of rain rings petrichor, wafts of green. Angry. Your children are angry with you as hymns are sung, hymns you loved at Mass. Oh, how you sang them in your hospital bed, and it doesn't rain, and no one sings, and her tears won't let me look away. In pearls and iron gray, your widow weeps without sound. The sky is in her, or she is in the sky. She's Spanish moss. She's mourning dove in a thunderstorm. Thundering, my mother's in navy. I search black tunic and growing belly for my friend who once danced in high heels and tight silk till dawn to dirty beats. She's marbleized, with the sun and another on the way. 2 seats back in a borrowed dress, I peel copper polish off my nails. The color, a penny for your thoughts. I'd give many more to know yours about him. Someone you never knew holds my hands softly like a cradled broken shell. I'm at your funeral with a man you never knew existed. He's polite in a way you might have found condescending. He insisted on coming. Abuelo, you died believing I was still in love with the long-limbed boy who smoked on the rooftop and read epic poetry. Now wax burns and a line forms to watch your casket plunge into the earth. Once you've been pushed deep enough, we'll shower you with dirt, roses, holy waters, and gardenias. This will feed you now. I want to crawl far through time and space to learn your secrets. I'll find you wandering in a palace on a garnet shore. You in a palace on a garnet shore, dressed like a young Maharaja, big eyes full of mischief and eyeliner, prepared to sail off into the unknown. But all I can think of is that skin left in the room, graying, sweating cold, cleft yellow, cracked toenails, dried rust in your throat, your body a wrung-out scarecrow covered in bed sores. Teach me again to gamble. Tell me how to play scratch-offs, when to plant flowers. Let's pretend to smoke with chalk sticks while reading novela subtitles. Give me riddles that make me roll my R's. Feed me mate or any herb. And then I laughed at your funeral. Yes, then I laughed at your funeral when the doves that were supposed to fly out of a wooden box and over your grave as you were cradled down into the earth did not. Later, I learned they died in the dark garage of a forgetful woman. We said a final prayer for you as a pitying of doves scratched and beat its wings hard inside a car trunk somewhere. A bloated and breathless pile of plumes, still warm. And you, with your nails trimmed and your eyes sewn shut, made me smile. Still, no one ever told my grandmother about the birds or the woman you had. No one ever told my grandmother about the woman, the ones who stopped eating to fit into black seam stockings, taken to hotel beds and dressed up for parties and family dinners in front of the woman who had your 4 children, who worked factory jobs, sewing, selling, lining up, sewing, selling, lining up, keeping face when you lost everything, who changed your diapers when you became a 78-year-old child. Still, no one said a word. You were bred, they said, to love horses and women, galloping in custom European souls. You win, you lose, you win, you lose, you win, you lose, you win, you lose, you win, you lose. You find faith in every folded paper clipping. The lottery tickets, cassettes, and newspapers you never let go. You did not leave me white gold or sapphires in a metal box, but a suitcase full of letters, stamps, photographs. That night, the phone rings. It's your brother calling to say goodbye. And you who can no longer speak without choking, screech, moan, hit your head against the pillow, rocks are falling from the sky and you've been hit in the stomach, rosary held tight. I left the room when I heard your last breath. And this is the title poem for the book, called Danzirly. Winding through titanic red rocks. I'm 14. It's the first road trip my family's ever taken. It's attached to a funeral. Claro, my mother repeats at every stop, at every merge, por Dios. We drive from Florida to Colorado in a van with no AC. It's July. These vacaciones, I want to show you this country, my father says. America. The word fills the car with the air of fable and triumph. I came here with nothing but a bag full of books, jobless. You know, I learned English from the radio, country music. My sister turns up her Walkman and I groan at the thought of listening to country music for the next 9 hours. This is your country, he exclaims, as if announcing it to the valleys when we stop at a lookout. He sermonizes to the bronze statues at rest stops, fields of open sunflowers, the majesty of purple mountains, rivers, bridges, and patches of antennas and wind turbines. Oh, say, can you see by the Danzirly light? Yes, Danzirly. When learning the anthem, he claimed this adjective as the most glorious exclamation in the English language. He greeted strangers at the grocery store with, "What a Danzirly day." The afterglow of sunsets, Danzirly. The trailing of hysterical laughter, Danzirly. A pelican's wingspan, a coupon mailer, gliding a knife on the surface of a new tub of butter, all Danzirly. We now know it's dawns early, but on this road trip, it's a mystical compound. We attend the funeral, bagpipes, tears, estranged family glances. Back on the road, he continues. For the land of the free and the home of the, driving too slowly at every speed trap. After 22 years in this country, he is still afraid of cops. We've rehearsed the protocol just in case. Act over patriotic. Smile. He continues talking, like a loro mojado, as my mother says. The drive back is full of stories of factories he's worked in. He glosses over discrimination. This is your country, he repeats. In the accent I watched people imitate and smirk at, electing to speak to me instead of my parents. You are American, he says. Not naively, but brazenly grateful to live under this dawn's early sky. Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria, for that terrific reading of those good poems. I've had the pleasure of hearing some of them before, but I don't get tired of hearing them again. So, and I really love your format, the fact that you have the Spanish on one side and the next to the English. I think that's so powerful. And I found myself in reading your book wanting to kind of go back and forth. And I still know a little bit of Spanish and enjoyed the interplay between the two. So thank you. Thank you. We will segue now into our Q&A. And so we get all of us on the screen at this point. And this is really meant to be a sort of conversation about your poems, about your good books, and also about the craft of poetry. So I think what I want to start with for both of you, I'm struck by how, for instance, Yolanda, in your poems, you're often exploring what I believe you call in a poem, one of your lines, the hand that holds the pen. And Gloria, in your wonderful book, you're looking at the different aspects and kind of questioning the American dream somewhat through the lens of a Latinx perspective. And so I'm kind of wondering, so what does it mean for you, Yolanda? What does it mean to write whiter or blacker? And to Gloria, what does it mean to write through that Latinx perspective, if I may, through that lens? Can you both talk about to what extent you see these identities maybe being the sort of backbone or the heartbeat of your books, and how does that affect some of your choices with respect maybe to your diction, whether or not you use form, certainly your subject matter, any of those things that you think you're making some of those choices because of the lens through which you're coming at those poems? Could you each just talk about that for a little bit? And Yolanda, we'll start with you.
Okay. Gloria, what a beautiful reading. I wrote down some really great lines. I'm really excited to get your book. I wanted to say that first. What a pleasure. I really believe that I would have to say Lucille Clifton is one of my favorites in assisting me as one of the first to be able to answer that question. Like there's no other way to write except for the way of who I am and where I come from. That experience is always going to, if you will, be that guiding lens for the language in which I was raised in and the language in which I was taught to how to express those things. And I think also in the way in which Zora Neale Hurston embodied that, being she's called the genius from the South, right? Coming from my home state, and how she spent her entire life capturing the ways in which language was created and engaged in the communities in which she represents. And I think it's a pleasure to be able to think about what poetry is, where it's come from, and taking those steps to be, I believe, brave enough to honor that language in which you come from and that you grew up around, at least for me, in my work. So I find that joy in ways in which what we know for form, what we know for the tradition of poetry, to find myself situating myself in it and creating new ways in which to have that authenticity and in the language that in which I've been raised in, where I come from, that I love, that makes me who I am as a person and in the way that I express myself. So for me, I believe that's kind of where I draw it from.
Yeah. Yeah. And so for example, I think I hear in many of your poems a sort of that backdrop of hip hop coming through, and the way you use slang and the way that you use that, the Black sort of the sounds that I find so refreshing they feel raw and authentic. And I mean, I have to assume that happens not only naturally, but it's also something you feel important as a technique to be able to draw the poems.
Yes, it is. I think for the challenge for me for the page really has to do with whether or not tradition will accept that type of voice, that authenticity, if you will, of where I come from and how I situate myself with the sounds of the language around me. And I think that I've now kind of gotten over that fear of what will someone think about those things. And Sonia Sanchez has always tells her students that you have to kind of learn form in order to know how to break it. And so to kind of being in that idea of being bilingual but in a way that is different than Gloria, who I know will speak on that. It's, to me, being from the South and being a Black woman from the South, I think it's very adjacent to what it must mean to be bilingual, if you will.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And of course, Zora Neale Hurston was one of the very first to really do that in her writing.
Yes.
And so it makes sense to hear that she's one of your heroes.
She is.
Heroines.
One of my little patrons.
Yeah. Good. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So how about for you, Gloria? I mean, I'm guessing there may be some similarities, but also even some differences, because you're also, I'm curious about the way in which you're working. I guess it's not really translation because that's your language too. So I'm kind of curious about that. Could you talk a little bit about kind of that identity, about how that perspective, that lens informs your poems?
Definitely. Absolutely. Spanish is my first language. I grew up speaking Spanish at home and learned English at school. And it's just an integral part of how I figure things out and understand language and understand imagery. for example, and sound, like the sonic quality of a line and of a stanza and repetition. If I can't figure it out in English, if I'm starting in English, I switch to Spanish and vice versa. Yeah, because they're similar, but they're different enough that I'm able to sort of get new insights from the different vowel sounds and images and how we put things together. I love what you said, Yolanda, about, it being an honor to bring that aspect of yourself into your work, because I feel the same way. I feel like, there's no getting away. There's no escaping who I am. Not, even if I wanted to. And it's an honor to be who I am and to sort of come from a people who values language and who values song and who values, while not everyone in my family writes poetry or publishes books or does like all the incredibly nerdy things that I do, they memorize poems and they memorize songs. Oh my gosh. It's like, I feel like people have like a catalog of discography that they carry around. Some people in my family, I'm like, they know these songs, they know these things because they know rhythm and sound and repetition. And that's how I got into poetry. It was parties when I was really little. It was really late at night and the kids were like mostly asleep. And I remember, I would see family members just stand up and they would start reciting poems or telling jokes. It was like they had these like amazing stand-up routines, which I'm pretty sure stand-up is even more difficult than writing poetry because it's really hard to tell a funny joke. And sort of being in that hazy space of just like the celebration of language and of tone and rhythm. And there was no shame in it. It was, in a place where we're told to be smaller and to be, to go kind of into the backgrounds. It was just front and center on stage. So it's something I carry and I'm really proud of and happy to bring into my work. It was a dream that this collection, like I wrote it bilingually and then I started submitting it everywhere. And a lot of publishers don't want bilingual work, even though we live in a country where Spanish is really climbing to be an equally dominant language. So I felt incredibly lucky to have this book published in both English and Spanish.
Well, and I would say the power for both. I think a lot of the power of your poems for both of you come from those places where you're using those perspectives, those identities as a sort of heartbeat of the poems. Yeah, and interesting how you've got the overlay of music for both of you, what you're talking about, Gloria, and the importance of sound and music, and then even just your title, Blood Vinyls, right? Absolutely, yeah. We just have a few more minutes, but I want to talk or ask you both, because we've talked about form, and I love that both of you embrace form. I love to play around with form. I love making them new, changing them around, and both of you all are doing that. I'm curious, though, are there any forms, because, in terms of your work, for either of you, are there places that you feel that if you stick too much to a form, you are reinforcing what may be thought of as the sort of white canon, as opposed to breaking free? To what extent do you prefer to take a form and make it your own, switch it around, as almost a sort of political act, if you will, as a way of fighting back a bit from what has been handed down? Although we all love beautiful traditional forms as well, but I'm kind of curious about that, since you both do sometimes write in form. You want to start on this one, Gloria?
Oh, sure, definitely. I've been thinking a lot lately about weaving and sewing and sort of the manual arts. I come from a long line of matriarchs who use their hands to make things. And I've just been thinking a lot about like, what would a poem look like if it was written by a sewing machine with like the pattern of what a needle does and how it works.
Interesting.
Same with, weaving, like this sort of repetition And as you repeat, you have, suddenly a new line that's making an image unravel. So I bring that up because it's something literally I stay up researching this. But I bring it up to talk about how I'm curious about how form comes from every culture and every aspect of being. Even making, I was making arepas the other day for family, and just even that process of the making. And while I use form formally, that is, I would say it's mainly European. Most of our forms that we have are sort of the West. Even the glossa is from Spain. I think there's so much more out there that I want to tap into.
Sure.
Yeah. So I love that question because absolutely. It's what we learn. Oh my gosh. My first love, my great love when I started reading poems was John Donne. As a 11-year-old. And I was like, what am I doing? When I look back, I'm like, why did I love John Donne? But I had never read anything as beautiful as a holy sonnet. It's they rocked my world. But that's what I was given, that's what I was given at school. And I always wonder what would have happened if I read Langston Hughes first, or if I read, if I had read House on Mango Street earlier in my life, how would that have influenced me differently? But yeah, so I think a lot about form, and I'm curious to sort of do new things with it as well.
How about you, Yolanda? We probably just have a few more minutes, but what do you think in terms of form? What you're doing with form in your book?
Yes. I love to take multiple forms, especially at least two, and merge them and have them have a baby. So I think about forms as in people who just get together and make a family. So I'm really interested in, like I mentioned, with taking a cento and then crown it in a sonnet form. Right now I only have 7, so I gotta I'm working through how is this gonna work, and then it's gonna readjust, and then the lines are gonna switch. What would that be like in the world of form if you play with it that way? Hence the left-handed golden shovel and Terence Hayes' invention of what he says. What makes a shovel means that you have to take a poem from Gwendolyn Brooks to make it happen. And I said, well, why not her friend Sonia?
Right.
I like Sonia. let's play with that. And why does it have to be on the right-hand side? Why don't we put it to the left?
There you go.
To kind of see what would happen. It's really fun for me. Kind of like a chemistry experiment or something. Yeah.
Well, so in forms and in changing forms up, we're all sort of inventing new things, right? So the knots forms, the invented forms. You have a wonderful line in your book, Gloria, forgive me if I don't get it exactly right, but something to the effect of we're all on the cusp of inventing something new, right? We're all on the cusp of inventing something new or something like that, correct? So I just, what would you invent if you're outside the realm of poetry? Is there something that you've thought of that you'd like to invent? And we'll end on that note. Have you thought of something new outside of poetry that if you could, you would invent?
I feel like right now in this time that we're in, I would invent instant travel, instant genie style travel, because there's so many people that I desperately miss. And the screen isn't cutting it for me. I don't know about you all, but I there's people who I want to squeeze.
There you go.
And hold close and flop onto a couch with. So that's what I would invent right now.
Good. That's good. Yeah.
If I knew anything about how to make an app, I would make an app that helps with travel for those of us who love to carry or travel with books. To make that a little bit more convenient.
There you go. Okay. Well, thank you both again so much for being with us in the Dalí Poetry Series. And thanks to all of you who have tuned in this evening. And please tell your friends and family if you know that they haven't had a chance to join us, they can find us anytime on the Dalí YouTube channel. And look forward to seeing you someday in person again. And
awesome. Yes.
Until then, everybody, stay safe, and good to see you. All right. Thanks again,
you.
Yolanda, and to
right.
Gloria. It was our pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Right. Bye.
Thank you.